Did she actually have the nerve to come here? The sharp whisper from my sister Olivia carried through the bridal suite. That woman has absolutely no shame. I've already told the ushers to keep an eye on her. Despite our occasional disagreements. Over the years, I felt a wave of gratitude toward my sister at that moment. She was unquestionably in my corner today, ready to defend what should have been the happiest day of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen before the ornate full-length mirror, my wedding dress catching the light that streamed through the bay windows of the historic Elmwood Estate. The intricate lace details that had seemed so perfect during fittings now felt suffocating. As I processed what Olivia had just told me, Natalie Winters, my fiancé Daniel's ex-girlfriend of 4 years, had somehow secured an invitation to our wedding and was currently sitting in the front row, mere feet from where I would soon be, saying my vows. How did she even get in? I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. The woman who had nearly destroyed Daniel's life was now threatening to overshadow our wedding day. Someone must have given her a +1, Olivia said, adjusting my veil with practiced precision. Don't worry, Eliza. I won't let her ruin this day for you. You've waited too long and overcome too much to let that woman steal your moment. If only Olivia knew the half of it. My relationship with Daniel had been a carefully reconstructed phoenix rising from the ashes of betrayal, heartbreak, and secrets that had taken me years to uncover. Secrets about Natalie that even Daniel hadn't fully understood until recently. Secrets that made her presence here today not just inappropriate but potentially dangerous. My name is Eliza Morgan, soon to be Eliza Chen, and at 34 years old, I was finally marrying the love of my life after a journey that had tested every ounce of faith, resilience, and forgiveness I possessed. From the outside, today probably looked like a classic Boston spring wedding, historic venue, cherry blossoms in bloom, string quartet playing softly in the background. But beneath the picture-perfect surface lay a story of deception, vindication, and second chances that nobody in that chapel could possibly imagine. 5 minutes, Mrs. Almoschen called the wedding coordinator, popping her head through the doorway. Your groom is waiting, and he looks absolutely smitten. The thought of Daniel standing at the altar brought a genuine smile to my face despite the situation. Daniel Chen, brilliant architect, devoted partner, and the man who had helped me rebuild my sense of self after my world imploded 3 years ago. The man who was about to become my husband, despite Natalie's last-ditch effort to assert her presence in our lives. Shall we do a final check? Olivia asked, her bridesmaid instincts kicking in. She smoothed the satin of my A-line gown and adjusted the delicate pearl hairpins securing my updo. Something old, Mom's earrings. Something new, the dress. Something borrowed, my bracelet. Something blue, the sapphire in my engagement ring, I finished, twisting the platinum band that had become a constant reminder of Daniel's promise. Not just his promise of marriage, but his promise that the past would stay in the past. That the woman who had systematically tried to destroy his career and reputation would never touch our future. A promise that was being tested by Natalie's brazen appearance in the front row of our wedding. Do you want me to have her removed? Olivia asked, her voice dropping to a protective whisper. Just say the word, and security will escort her out. No one would blame you. I considered it for a moment, imagining the satisfaction of watching Natalie being led away, her calculated plan to disrupt our day thwarted before it could begin. But then I thought of the months of preparation, not for this wedding, but for the moment Natalie would inevitably try to insert herself back into our lives. I had been waiting for this, planning for it, almost hoping for it. Because Natalie Winters had made a crucial mistake, she had underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. No, I said, smoothing my expression into one of serene confidence. Let her stay. Let her watch. Olivia looked shocked. Are you sure? After everything she did? I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, picking up my bouquet of white peonies and blush roses. Some people need to witness what they've lost before they can truly understand the consequences of their actions. The string quartet transitioned to Pachelbel's canon, the signal that it was time for the bridesmaids to begin their procession. Olivia squeezed my hand one last time before lining up behind my other 3 closest friends, each dressed in flowing sage green that complemented the venue's garden setting. My father appeared at my side, his eyes misty as he took in the sight of his only daughter in her wedding dress. You look beautiful, pumpkin, he said, offering his arm. Are you ready? I took a deep breath, centering myself in the moment. I've been ready for this day for 3 years, Dad. As we stepped into position behind the massive oak doors of the chapel, I caught a glimpse of the assembled guests through the crack. Nearly 200 people had gathered to celebrate our union, colleagues, friends, family members who had supported us through the darkest periods of our relationship. And there, in the front row beside Daniel's parents, sat Natalie, her copper hair arranged in elaborate curls, wearing a dress that pushed the boundaries of wedding guest appropriateness. The doors swung open, and the opening notes of the bridal march filled the historic chapel. All eyes turned to me, including hers. I felt Natalie's gaze like a physical weight, heavy with resentment and calculation. But when my eyes locked with Daniel's at the end of the aisle, everything else faded away. His face lit up with a mixture of awe and adoration that instantly calmed my racing heart. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. This was our moment, and no one, especially not Natalie Winters, could take it away from us. My father and I began our slow procession down the aisle. With each step, I felt more certain of the path I had chosen. The past 3 years had been a masterclass in patience, in strategizing, in protecting what mattered while preparing for moments exactly like this one. As we passed the third row, I noticed several guests glancing uncomfortably between me and Natalie, clearly aware of the history and confused by her presence. When we reached the front, my father placed my hand in Daniel's and stepped back. Daniel squeezed my fingers gently, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected challenge we were facing together. Then he leaned in, using the moment to whisper in my ear under the guise of a greeting. "She's here," he murmured, his voice so low that not even the officiant could hear. "Front row, next to my mother." "I know," I whispered back. "It's okay. We knew this might happen." Daniel's eyes searched mine, concern evident in their depths. But I gave him a reassuring smile. We had prepared for this possibility over many late-night conversations, gaming out scenarios and responses like chess players anticipating an opponent's moves. The officiant cleared his throat and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Eliza Morgan and Daniel Chen." As the ceremony progressed, I found myself hyper-aware of Natalie's presence. From the corner of my eye, I could see her shifting in her seat, her expression alternating between forced politeness and barely concealed animosity. When the officiant asked if anyone knew of any reason why we should not be joined in marriage, there was a moment of breathless tension as every person familiar with our history glanced surreptitiously at Natalie. But she remained silent, though the white-knuckled grip on her clutch betrayed her internal struggle. We exchanged our personally written vows, Daniel promising to stand by me through every challenge, to honor the strength he admired in me, to build a future founded on honesty and trust. I vowed to be his partner in all things, to face life's obstacles together, and to never let past shadows darken our shared path. The words carried deeper meaning with Natalie witnessing them, each promise a subtle declaration that we had overcome what she had tried to destroy. As we exchanged rings, Daniel's hands were steady, his eyes never leaving mine. But just as the officiant was about to pronounce us husband and wife, Daniel leaned in close again, his lips near my ear. "She's not just his ex, Eliza," he whispered, his voice carrying an urgency that made my heart skip. "I just realized who invited her. Look at her left hand." I did, discreetly shifting my gaze toward Natalie while maintaining my bride's smile. There on her ring finger was an unmistakable diamond band that matched the one worn by Marcus Phillips, Daniel's former business partner and the man seated beside her. The man who had nearly been implicated in the scandal that almost ended Daniel's career. The man who, until this moment, I had believed was firmly on our side. In that split second, the pieces clicked into place. Natalie wasn't just an ex-girlfriend making a desperate play for attention. She was now connected to the very person who had the most to gain from Daniel's downfall 3 years ago. The very person who still had access to information that could damage everything we had worked to rebuild. "I know exactly who she is," I whispered back, squeezing Daniel's hands in reassurance. "And after today, she'll know exactly who I am too." The officiant's voice broke through our private exchange. "By the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Daniel pulled me close, his kiss conveying both love and solidarity in the face of the unexpected complication. As we turned to face our guests as a married couple for the first time, my eyes met Natalie's. I offered her a smile, not the triumphant smirk she might have expected, but a calm, knowing expression that made her visibly uncomfortable. She was the first to look away. The reception was held in the Elmwood Estate's grand ballroom, a soaring space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the immaculate gardens. As Daniel and I moved through the traditional moments, first dance, cake cutting, toasts from loved ones, I kept Natalie and Marcus in my peripheral vision. They were playing the part of ordinary guests, but their frequent whispered conversations and the way Marcus kept checking his phone suggested something more calculated was at play. During the father-daughter dance, my dad held me close, swaying to Frank Sinatra's "The Way You Look Tonight." You seem distracted, Pumpkin, he observed quietly. Is everything okay? Just keeping an eye on an unexpected guest, I admitted. Natalie Winters is here. My father missed a step, his expression darkening. As a retired judge, he knew exactly who Natalie was and the role she had played in the professional ethics complaint that had nearly cost Daniel his architectural license. What the hell is she doing here? And how did she get past Olivia's guest list scrutiny? She's with Marcus Phillips, I explained. Apparently they're engaged. My father's eyebrows shot up. Marcus? Daniel's former partner? The one who, the very same, I confirmed, maintaining my smile for the benefit of the wedding photographer circling us. Do you want me to handle this? He asked, the protective father instinct still strong despite my 34 years. I still have connections with security here. I shook my head slightly. No, Dad. Daniel and I have this under control. In fact, in some ways, her being here makes everything easier. The confusion on my father's face was evident, but he trusted me enough not to press further. If you're sure. But remember, you don't have to manage everything alone anymore. That's the whole point of the partnership you just committed to. As the dance ended, Daniel appeared at my side, seamlessly taking my hand from my father's. Mind if I steal my wife for a moment? He asked, the word wife carrying a note of proud emphasis. My father nodded, patting Daniel on the shoulder before making his way toward the bar. Daniel led me to a quiet corner of the ballroom, partially concealed by an elaborate flower arrangement. They're planning something, he said without preamble, his voice low. Marcus has been texting someone throughout the reception, and I just overheard Natalie mention the Westland Project to your cousin James. The Westland Project was Daniel's current major commission, a sustainable mixed-use development that was set to cement his professional comeback. It was also directly competing with a proposal from Marcus's new firm, with the final decision from investors due next week. She's fishing for information, I said, the pieces falling into place. They're desperate. The Westland Project would put your firm years ahead of Marcus's, especially with the sustainable design elements you've incorporated. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration on a day that should have been purely joyful. I'm sorry, Eliza. I never thought she would go this far, or that Marcus would. I placed my hand on his cheek, stopping his apology. Don't. We've been preparing for something like this for months. The only surprise is the timing. On our wedding day, though? Daniel shook his head, disbelief evident in his expression. That's a new low, even for them. It's actually perfect, I said, a small smile playing at my lips. Everyone we need is here. All the pieces are in place. We just need to accelerate the timeline a bit. Daniel studied my face, recognition dawning in his eyes. You want to do it now? Here? I nodded. Phase 3 was always going to happen at a public event where both Marcus and Natalie were present. What better venue than our wedding reception, with all of Boston's architectural community as witnesses? For a moment, Daniel looked uncertain. Are you sure? This is supposed to be our celebration, not a confrontation. What better way to celebrate than by finally closing this chapter for good? I countered. Besides, they brought this to our doorstep. They chose the battlefield. Daniel's expression shifted from concern to the quiet determination I had fallen in love with. Okay. But we do this together, as planned. As planned, I agreed, squeezing his hand. I'll text Olivia to set things in motion. You keep an eye on Marcus and make sure he doesn't leave before the slideshow. The slideshow, ostensibly a collection of photos from our relationship, had been prepared with dual purpose months ago, an insurance policy we had hoped not to need at our wedding. But Natalie and Marcus had forced our hand. As Daniel moved to engage Marcus in conversation, keeping him occupied near the main screen, I signaled to Olivia across the room. She excused herself from her conversation and met me by the dessert table, concern evident in her expression. What's wrong? Did she say something to you? Olivia asked, already scanning the room for Natalie. Not yet, but she's planning something, I said, keeping my voice casual as if discussing the cake flavors. We need to move up the timeline. Is James ready with the technical aspects? Olivia nodded, instantly switching from protective sister to efficient co-conspirator. He's had the alternate slideshow queued up since we spotted her during the ceremony. Just say the word. James, my cousin and IT security specialist, had been an integral part of our contingency planning. What Natalie and Marcus didn't know was that their presence had activated a sequence of events that had been carefully orchestrated over the past year. Tell him we're going with Plan B, starting in 15 minutes, I instructed. And make sure the Westland investors are near the screen. Mr. Takahashi and Mrs. Okonkwo should have a clear view. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. You're really doing this now? At your wedding reception? They made their choice, I said simply. Now they get to live with the consequences. As Olivia moved to relay the message to James, I caught sight of Natalie making her way toward Daniel and Marcus. Her body language was casual, but I recognized the predatory intent behind her smile. She had always been skilled at creating moments that appeared coincidental while pursuing a calculated agenda. I intercepted her smoothly, stepping into her path with a champagne flute in hand. Natalie, I greeted her, my voice pleasant but cool. What an unexpected surprise to see you here. Her smile faltered momentarily before reasserting itself. Eliza. Congratulations. The ceremony was touching. Thank you, I replied, maintaining eye contact that made her visibly uncomfortable. I'm curious, though, who extended the invitation? I don't recall seeing your name on our guest list. Natalie gestured vaguely toward Marcus. I'm here with Marcus Phillips. I assumed you knew we were together. Actually, I had no idea, I lied smoothly. How long has that been going on? About a year, she said, a hint of defiance entering her voice. We're engaged now. I allowed my gaze to drop to her ring, a large diamond that somehow managed to look both expensive and tasteless. Congratulations, I said, raising my glass slightly. You two certainly deserve each other. The barb landed exactly as intended, a flash of anger crossing Natalie's face before she could mask it. What's that supposed to mean? Oh, nothing specific, I said with deliberate ambiguity. Just that it's fascinating how life works out sometimes. The right people tend to find each other eventually. Before she could respond, the soft music playing throughout the reception faded, and my cousin James's voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention please. As is tradition, we've prepared a special slideshow celebrating the journey of our bride and groom. If everyone could gather around the main screen, we're about to share some cherished memories of Daniel and Eliza. Natalie glanced toward the screen, then back at me. If you'll excuse me, I should find Marcus. Oh, you definitely should. I agreed, my tone making her pause. In fact, I think you'll both find the next few minutes illuminating. The lights dimmed slightly as guests gathered around the large screen at the end of the ballroom. Daniel appeared at my side, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture of support. On my other side, Olivia materialized with a subtle nod confirming that everything was in place. The slideshow began innocuously enough, childhood photos of Daniel and me, images from when we first met at a charity gala 6 years ago, candid shots from vacations and family gatherings. The assembled guests smiled and occasionally chuckled. At particularly endearing moments. Then the tone shifted subtly. A photo appeared of Daniel receiving an award for architectural innovation 4 years ago. Standing beside him in the image was Marcus, both of them smiling broadly. The next slide showed a newspaper headline, Chen Phillips design selected for landmark downtown project. I felt Natalie stiffen nearby as she realized the narrative was changing. The slideshow continued, now interspersing photos of our relationship with documentation of Daniel and Marcus's once successful partnership. Then came the slide that caused an audible murmur in the crowd, a Boston Globe article with the headline, Prominent Architect Faces Ethics Investigation. The photo accompanying the article showed Daniel leaving a hearing, his expression grim. In the background, barely noticeable unless you knew to look, was Natalie, watching with what could only be described as satisfaction. Marcus stepped forward, his voice low but urgent. What is this? This isn't appropriate for a wedding slideshow. Before anyone could respond, the next slide appeared, an email displayed in high resolution, clearly sent from Natalie Winters to the Architectural Licensing Board. The subject line read, Evidence of Code Violations in Chen Designs. The date stamp showed it was sent just 2 days after Daniel had ended their relationship. More emails followed in quick succession, correspondence between Natalie and Marcus from 3 years ago, planning what could only be described as a coordinated attempt to discredit Daniel professionally after he had dissolved their partnership. Due to ethical concerns about Marcus's business practices. The room had gone completely silent. From the corner of my eye, I could see Mrs. Okonkwo, the lead Westland investor, watching with intense interest, her expression hardening as the evidence mounted on screen. Turn this off immediately, Marcus demanded, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He looked around for the AV controls, but James had secured the system. The final slides delivered the coup de grace, screenshots of text messages exchanged between Natalie and Marcus just yesterday, explicitly discussing their plan to use the wedding to gather information about the Westland project proposal and undermine Daniel with the investors. The last image faded, leaving the screen white. In the stunned silence that followed, I stepped forward, still holding my champagne flute. I want to thank everyone for sharing this special day with us, I said, my voice steady and clear. As many of you know, 3 years ago, Daniel faced false accusations that nearly destroyed his career. What you may not have known until now is who was behind those accusations, and why. Daniel joined me, his shoulder touching mine in solidarity. Eliza and I considered keeping this private, even after we discovered the truth. But when certain individuals, his gaze flicked meaningfully toward Marcus and Natalie, decided to bring their agenda to our wedding day, we felt the full story deserved to be told. I scanned the room, noting the mix of shock, understanding, and in some cases, vindication on the faces of our guests. Many had stood by Daniel during the ethics investigation, believing in his integrity even when evidence seemed stacked against him. To be clear, I continued, every document you just saw has been authenticated by digital forensics experts and submitted to the appropriate professional boards and legal authorities. We're not sharing this to create drama on our wedding day, but to finally close a painful chapter and move forward with transparency. Natalie moved suddenly, grabbing her clutch from a nearby chair. This is slander, she hissed, though her voice lacked conviction. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. Actually, my father interjected, stepping forward with the authority of his judicial background. Everything presented here is documented evidence collected through legal channels. I've reviewed it personally. Slander involves false statements. Ms. Winters. These appear to be your own words. Marcus, recognizing the magnitude of what had just occurred, particularly in front of the Westland investors, attempted damage control. This is being taken entirely out of context, he insisted, addressing the room. Professional disagreements have been misconstrued as something nefarious. Mrs. Okonkwo, the investor he was clearly most concerned about, regarded him coolly. Context is indeed important, Mr. Phillips. Perhaps you can explain the context of messages sent yesterday explicitly discussing using this wedding to gather competitive intelligence? As Marcus fumbled for a response, Daniel squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of what we had accomplished. 3 years of patient evidence gathering, of strategic planning, of waiting for the right moment, all culminating in this public vindication. The wedding coordinator, sensing the tension, quickly instructed the band to resume playing. As music filled the awkward silence, guests gradually began to disperse, many casting disapproving glances toward Natalie and Marcus. The Westland investors gathered in a corner, their body language making it clear that Marcus's firm was no longer under consideration. Natalie pushed past several guests, heading for the exit with Marcus following close behind. As they reached the doorway, I excused myself from Daniel's side and intercepted them for one final exchange. Natalie, I said quietly, so only the 3 of us could hear. You once told Daniel that he would regret choosing me over you. I hope tonight has clarified exactly how that prediction turned out. Her eyes narrowed with genuine hatred. You think this is over? You have no idea what. Actually, I have every idea, I interrupted calmly. Every email, every text, every manipulated document from the past 3 years. What you saw tonight was just the highlight reel. The authorities have the complete collection. Marcus put his hand on Natalie's arm, attempting to guide her out before she could make the situation worse. This isn't finished, he muttered as they passed. You're right about that, I agreed. The ethics board hearing regarding your professional conduct is scheduled for next month. I believe your formal notification should arrive on Monday. The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized the full extent of our countermeasures. Without another word, he pulled Natalie through the doorway and out of our reception. I returned to Daniel's side, where he was speaking with Mr. Takahashi, the other primary Westland investor. As I approached, Mr. Takahashi bowed slightly in acknowledgement. Mrs. Chen, he said, using my new name for the first time. I was just telling your husband that I admire how you both handled this unfortunate situation. Integrity is revealing itself in difficult moments. Thank you, I replied. We regret that our personal celebration became entangled with professional matters. Mr. Takahashi smiled knowingly. Some battles cannot be chosen, only faced when they arrive. I look forward to our meeting next week. I believe our decision regarding the Westland project will be straightforward now. As he moved away to join Mrs. Okonkwo, Daniel turned to me, his expression a mixture of relief, vindication, and concern. Are you okay? He asked, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. This isn't exactly how I imagined our reception would go. I smiled, feeling the weight of 3 years of careful planning finally lifting from my shoulders. Actually, it's perfect. They came here thinking they could use our happiness against us. Instead, we used their arrogance against them. Daniel glanced toward the doorway where Natalie and Marcus had exited. Do you think they'll retaliate? They can try, I said with the confidence of someone who had prepared for every contingency. But they won't get far. Every move they've made in the past 3 years has been documented, every scheme tracked. Tonight was just the culmination of their mistakes. Daniel shook his head in amazement. When I met you 6 years ago, I never imagined I was falling in love with such a formidable strategist. And I never imagined I'd need to become one, I replied honestly. But loving you meant fighting for you. For us. For the truth. As the band transitioned to a slower song, Daniel extended his hand. May I have this dance, Mrs. Chen? I stepped into his embrace, the familiar contours of his body against mine a reminder of everything we had fought to protect. As we swayed to the music, the events of the evening settled into perspective, not as an unfortunate intrusion on our wedding day, but as the final act in a long journey toward justice and vindication. Over Daniel's shoulder, I caught Olivia's eye. She raised her glass in a subtle toast, her expression conveying both congratulations and respect. My sister had been skeptical when I first outlined my plan to gather evidence against Natalie and Marcus, concerned that my focus on justice might become an unhealthy obsession. But tonight had proven that patience and meticulous planning could deliver both justice and liberation. What are you thinking about? Daniel murmured against my hair. I'm thinking that tonight marks the beginning of something new, I said. Truthfully. Not just our marriage, but a life no longer shadowed by their schemes. To new beginnings, then, Daniel said, pulling back slightly to meet my eyes. And to my brilliant wife, who never gave up. As we continued our dance, surrounded by friends and family who had witnessed both our struggle and our triumph, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. 3 years ago, when Daniel's reputation and career were under attack, I had made a choice, not just to stand by him, but to actively fight for the truth. That choice had transformed me from a woman who avoided conflict into someone who understood that sometimes, the only path to peace was through confrontation. Natalie had shown up at our wedding expecting to cause pain and gather ammunition. Instead, she had walked into a carefully set trap, becoming the architect of her own downfall. As she and Marcus retreated to deal with the professional and possibly legal consequences of their actions, Daniel and I moved forward into our future, stronger for having faced adversity together, clearer about what mattered, and finally free from the shadows of the past. The night continued with dancing, laughter, and celebration, all the more joyous for the sense of closure we had achieved. By the time Daniel and I departed amid a shower of rose petals, the earlier confrontation had transformed from a disruption into a powerful demonstration of our partnership. We had faced our adversaries together and emerged victorious on the very day we pledged our lives to one another. As our car pulled away from the Elmwood Estate, Daniel took my hand. That wasn't the wedding day most people dream about, he admitted, with a small smile. But somehow, it was perfectly us. I leaned my head against his shoulder, exhaustion and exhilaration mingling as the events of the day caught up with me. Perfect doesn't always mean conventional. Sometimes it means facing exactly what you need to face, exactly when you need to face it. And as Boston's skyline came into view, illuminated against the night sky, I knew that what we had demonstrated today was more than just the triumph of truth over deception. We had shown everyone, including ourselves, exactly what kind of partnership we were building, one where we faced challenges head-on, protected each other fiercely, and refused to let others define our story. In that way, despite, or perhaps because of, Natalie's presence in the front row, it had been the perfect wedding day after all. 3 years earlier, I sat alone in my car outside the Massachusetts Architectural Licensing Board, rain drumming against the windshield in perfect rhythm with my pounding heart. The digital clock on my dashboard read 4:37 p.m., nearly 2 hours since Daniel had entered the building for what should have been a routine hearing about alleged code violations in one of his designs. My phone remained silent, no updates since his brief text at 3:15, "This is worse than we thought. Don't wait for me." But I did wait, because that's what you do when you love someone. You wait through storms both literal and figurative, especially when you sense they're being unfairly battered by forces they don't yet understand. I was 31 then, working as a curator at the Boston Museum of Contemporary Art, specializing in architectural exhibits. My relationship with Daniel Chen had blossomed over shared passion for design innovation and creative expression. We'd been dating for 3 years, discussing marriage and children with the comfortable certainty of two people who had found their perfect match. Until 2 weeks ago, when an anonymous complaint was filed against Chen Phillips Design, the firm Daniel had built with his college friend Marcus Phillips. The complaint alleged serious structural safety violations in their award-winning Harborview Tower project, violations that, if substantiated, could cost Daniel his architectural license and potentially result in criminal charges for willful negligence. The timing was suspicious, coming just days after Daniel had confronted Marcus about financial discrepancies in the firm's accounts and suggested they dissolve their partnership. A sharp knock on my window startled me from my thoughts. Daniel stood in the downpour, his tailored suit soaked through, water streaming from his usually immaculate hair. I quickly unlocked the door, and he collapsed into the passenger seat, bringing with him the scent of rain and something else, defeat. "They're suspending my license pending a full investigation," he said without preamble, staring straight ahead. Through the rain-streaked windshield. "Someone submitted documentation showing I personally approved changes to the support structures in Harborview Tower, changes that violated at least 3 major building codes." "But you didn't," I stated rather than asked, because in the 2 years I'd known Daniel professionally before we began dating, his obsession with safety and code compliance was legendary in Boston's architectural community. "Of course I didn't," he confirmed, finally turning to look at me. The anguish in his eyes made my chest tighten. "The documents are forgeries, Eliza. Sophisticated ones. My signature, my stamp, my initials on every page, all perfect replicas. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to make it look like I knowingly compromised safety for cost savings." "Marcus?" I suggested, voicing the suspicion that had been forming since the complaint was filed so conveniently after their confrontation. Daniel ran a hand through his wet hair, sending droplets across the dashboard. "I don't want to believe it. We've been friends since MIT, built this firm from nothing." He trailed off, the evidence too compelling to ignore despite his loyalty. "But he's the only one who had access to my digital signature and stamp files. And he was suspiciously absent from today's hearing, claiming a family emergency in Chicago." "What happens now?" I asked, already mentally cataloging potential lawyers in my network, experts who might help, steps we could take to fight this. "Now," Daniel said with a heaviness that seemed to fill the car, "I watched 10 years of work and reputation potentially crumble while the board investigates. Best case scenario, I'm cleared but with a permanent asterisk beside my name in the industry. Worst case, I lose my license and face criminal charges." I reached over and took his hand, cold and damp from the rain. "No. The worst case would be facing this alone. But you're not alone, Daniel. We'll fight this, methodically, strategically, relentlessly if necessary." What I didn't mention, what I couldn't have known then as we sat watching rain transform the world outside into watery abstractions, was that this moment would mark the beginning of my own transformation. From a woman who appreciated beauty in order to one who understood that sometimes creating beauty required getting your hands very, very dirty. Later that night, as Daniel showered away the physical if not emotional residue of the day, I noticed his phone light up with a text notification. I wasn't the type to snoop, trust had always been the bedrock of our relationship, but the preview visible on his lock screen caught my attention. "Natalie Winters, Daniel, we need to talk about what happened today. I never meant for things to go this far. Please call me Natalie Winters." The name was familiar, Daniel's ex-girlfriend from before we met. They had dated for nearly 4 years before an apparently amicable breakup when their career paths diverged. He rarely mentioned her, and when he did, it was with the casual indifference of someone who had completely moved on. But her message suggested involvement in today's events that went beyond coincidence. When Daniel emerged from the shower, I held up his phone with the notification still visible. "I think you need to see this." He took the phone, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as he read the message. "This doesn't make any sense. Natalie and I haven't spoken in over 3 years." "Call her," I suggested. "On speaker. I want to hear what this far means." Daniel hesitated only briefly before nodding. He dialed her number, activating the speaker as the call connected. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered, sounding both surprised and oddly relieved. "Daniel. I wasn't sure you would call." "What did you mean by your text, Natalie?" Daniel asked, bypassing pleasantries. "What do you have to do with what happened today?" There was a pause, then a deep sigh. "I filed the initial complaint with the licensing board. But I swear, I only passed along information that was given to me. I didn't know it would escalate to a formal hearing and license suspension." Daniel's knuckles whitened around the phone. "Who gave you this information? And why would you file a complaint against me in the first place?" "Marcus came to me about 6 weeks ago," she admitted, each word seemingly dragged out with reluctance. "He said he had discovered serious ethical violations in your work, that you were cutting corners on safety to underbid competitors. He showed me documents, Daniel, they looked legitimate. He said as your former partner, he couldn't file the complaint himself without implicating his own firm, but he felt morally obligated to make sure someone reported it." I watched Daniel's face as he processed this betrayal, not just from his business partner but from someone he had once been close to. "And you believed him? Without even asking me for my side?" "He was very convincing," Natalie said, defensive. "Now. And frankly, people change, Daniel. Success changes people. The evidence seemed solid." The evidence was fabricated, Daniel replied, his voice ice cold. And now my career is potentially ruined because you chose to trust Marcus over even basic due diligence. That's why I'm contacting you now, she insisted. After the hearing today, Marcus said something that didn't sit right. He seemed satisfied about the suspension, not concerned like someone who was just doing the right thing ethically. I started to wonder if I'd been manipulated. I leaned closer to the phone. This is Eliza, Daniel's girlfriend. If you're having doubts now, Natalie, you need to go to the licensing board and tell them exactly what happened, including Marcus's role. Another pause, longer this time. I can't do that, she finally said. Marcus has leverage over me. Professional leverage. I work for the city planning department now, and he has connections that could damage my career. That's actually how we reconnected. I was assigned to review some of Chin Phillips' permit applications. As she and Marcus retreated to deal with the professional and possibly legal consequences of their actions, Daniel and I moved forward into our future, stronger for having faced adversity together, clearer about what mattered, and finally free from the shadows of the past. The night continued with dancing, laughter, and celebration, all the more joyous for the sense of closure we had achieved. By the time Daniel and I departed amid a shower of rose petals, the earlier confrontation had transformed from a disruption into a powerful demonstration of our partnership. We had faced our adversaries together and emerged victorious on the very day we pledged our lives to one another. As our car pulled away from the Elmwood Estate, Daniel took my hand. That wasn't the wedding day most people dream about, he admitted, with a small smile. But somehow, it was perfectly us. I leaned my head against his shoulder, exhaustion and exhilaration mingling as the events of the day caught up with me. Perfect doesn't always mean conventional. Sometimes it means facing exactly what you need to face, exactly when you need to face it. And as Boston's skyline came into view, illuminated against the night sky, I knew that what we had demonstrated today was more than just the triumph of truth over deception. We had shown everyone, including ourselves, exactly what kind of partnership we were building, one where we faced challenges head-on, protected each other fiercely, and refused to let others define our story. In that way, despite, or perhaps because of, Natalie's presence in the front row, it had been the perfect wedding day after all. 3 years earlier, I sat alone in my car outside the Massachusetts Architectural Licensing Board, rain drumming against the windshield in perfect rhythm with my pounding heart. The digital clock on my dashboard read 4:37 p.m., nearly 2 hours since Daniel had entered the building for what should have been a routine hearing about alleged code violations in one of his designs. My phone remained silent, no updates since his brief text at 3:15, "This is worse than we thought. Don't wait for me." But I did wait, because that's what you do when you love someone. You wait through storms both literal and figurative, especially when you sense they're being unfairly battered by forces they don't yet understand. I was 31 then, working as a curator at the Boston Museum of Contemporary Art, specializing in architectural exhibits. My relationship with Daniel Chen had blossomed over shared passion for design innovation and creative expression. We'd been dating for 3 years, discussing marriage and children with the comfortable certainty of two people who had found their perfect match. Until 2 weeks ago, when an anonymous complaint was filed against Chin Phillips Design, the firm Daniel had built with his college friend Marcus Phillips. The complaint alleged serious structural safety violations in their award-winning Harborview Tower project, violations that, if substantiated, could cost Daniel his architectural license and potentially result in criminal charges for willful negligence. The timing was suspicious, coming just days after Daniel had confronted Marcus about financial discrepancies in the firm's accounts and suggested they dissolve their partnership. A sharp knock on my window startled me from my thoughts. Daniel stood in the downpour, his tailored suit soaked through, water streaming from his usually immaculate hair. I quickly unlocked the door, and he collapsed into the passenger seat, bringing with him the scent of rain and something else, defeat. "They're suspending my license pending a full investigation," he said without preamble, staring straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield. "Someone submitted documentation showing I personally approved changes to the support structures in Harborview Tower, changes that violated at least 3 major building codes." "But you didn't," I stated rather than asked, because in the 2 years I'd known Daniel professionally before we began dating, his obsession with safety and code compliance was legendary in Boston's architectural community. "Of course I didn't," he confirmed, finally turning to look at me. The anguish in his eyes made my chest tighten. "The documents are forgeries, Eliza. Sophisticated ones. My signature, my stamp, my initials on every page, all perfect replicas. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to make it look like I knowingly compromised safety for cost savings." "Marcus?" I suggested, voicing the suspicion that had been forming since the complaint was filed so conveniently after their confrontation. Daniel ran a hand through his wet hair, sending droplets across the dashboard. I don't want to believe it. We've been friends since MIT, built this firm from nothing. He trailed off, the evidence too compelling to ignore despite his loyalty. But he's the only one who had access to my digital signature and stamp files. And he was suspiciously absent from today's hearing, claiming a family emergency in Chicago. What happens now? I asked, already mentally cataloging potential lawyers in my network, experts who might help, steps we could take to fight this. Now, Daniel said with a heaviness that seemed to fill the car, I watched 10 years of work and reputation potentially crumble while the board investigates. Best case scenario, I'm cleared but with a permanent asterisk beside my name in the industry. Worst case, I lose my license and face criminal charges. I reached over and took his hand, cold and damp from the rain. No. The worst case would be facing this alone. But you're not alone, Daniel. We'll fight this, methodically, strategically, relentlessly if necessary. What I didn't mention, what I couldn't have known then as we sat watching rain transform the world outside into watery abstractions, was that this moment would mark the beginning of my own transformation. From a woman who appreciated beauty in order to one who understood that sometimes creating beauty required getting your hands very, very dirty. Later that night, as Daniel showered away the physical if not emotional residue of the day, I noticed his phone light up with a text notification. I wasn't the type to snoop, trust had always been the bedrock of our relationship, but the preview visible on his lock screen caught my attention. Natalie Winters, Daniel, we need to talk about what happened today. I never meant for things to go this far. Please call me Natalie Winters. The name was familiar, Daniel's ex-girlfriend from before we met. They had dated for nearly 4 years before an apparently amicable breakup when their career paths diverged. He rarely mentioned her, and when he did, it was with the casual indifference of someone who had completely moved on. But her message suggested involvement in today's events that went beyond coincidence. When Daniel emerged from the shower, I held up his phone with the notification still visible. I think you need to see this. He took the phone, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as he read the message. This doesn't make any sense. Natalie and I haven't spoken in over 3 years. Call her, I suggested. On speaker. I want to hear what this far means. Daniel hesitated only briefly before nodding. He dialed her number, activating the speaker as the call connected. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered, sounding both surprised and oddly relieved. Daniel. I wasn't sure you would call. What did you mean by your text, Natalie? Daniel asked, bypassing pleasantries. What do you have to do with what happened today? There was a pause, then a deep sigh. I filed the initial complaint with the licensing board. But I swear, I only passed along information that was given to me. I didn't know it would escalate to a formal hearing and license suspension. Daniel's knuckles whitened around the phone. Who gave you this information? And why would you file a complaint against me in the first place? Marcus came to me about 6 weeks ago, she admitted, each word seemingly dragged out with reluctance. He said he had discovered serious ethical violations in your work, that you were cutting corners on safety to underbid competitors. He showed me documents, Daniel, they looked legitimate. He said as your former partner, he couldn't file the complaint himself without implicating his own firm, but he felt morally obligated to make sure someone reported it. I watched Daniel's face as he processed this betrayal, not just from his business partner but from someone he had once been close to. And you believed him? Without even asking me for my side? He was very convincing, Natalie said, defensive. Now. And frankly, people change, Daniel. Success changes people. The evidence seemed solid. The evidence was fabricated, Daniel replied, his voice ice cold. And now my career is potentially ruined because you chose to trust Marcus over even basic due diligence. That's why I'm contacting you now, she insisted. After the hearing today, Marcus said something that didn't sit right. He seemed satisfied about the suspension, not concerned like someone who was just doing the right thing ethically. I started to wonder if I'd been manipulated. I leaned closer to the phone. This is Eliza, Daniel's girlfriend. If you're having doubts now, Natalie, you need to go to the licensing board and tell them exactly what happened, including Marcus's role. Another pause, longer this time. I can't do that, she finally said. Marcus has leverage over me. Professional leverage. I work for the city planning department now, and he has connections that could damage my career. That's actually how we reconnected. I was assigned to review some of Chin Phillips' permit applications. So you'll let Daniel take the fall because you're afraid for your own position? I couldn't keep the disgust from my voice. You don't understand the situation, Natalie snapped. I've already risked a lot by texting Daniel. I just wanted him to know that I'm sorry if the information was false. That's all I can do right now. Daniel's expression had shifted from shock to something harder, more resolved. That's not all you can do, Natalie. You can make a choice about what kind of person you want to be. But understand this, I will fight these allegations with everything I have. And when the truth comes out, everyone involved in the setup will face consequences. He ended the call before she could respond, setting the phone down on the coffee table as if it were contaminated. For several moments, we sat in silence, the implications of what we'd learned settling around us like dust after an explosion. She's lying, I said finally. Or at least not telling the whole truth. That wasn't the text of someone who innocently passed along information. That was guilt. Daniel nodded slowly. The question is whether she was actively conspiring with Marcus from the beginning, or if she was manipulated and now realizes it. Either way, I said, determination crystallizing within me, we need proof. Not just to clear your name, but to understand exactly what we're dealing with. That night marked the beginning of what would become a 3-year journey to uncover the truth and restore Daniel's reputation. What started as a defensive response to an unjust accusation evolved into a meticulous campaign of information gathering, strategic alliance building, and patient observation. And I discovered capabilities within myself I never knew existed. My first step was to leverage my professional network. As a museum curator who had organized several major architectural exhibitions, I had connections throughout Boston's design community. I began asking subtle questions, building a picture of Marcus Phillips both professionally and personally. I discovered that while Daniel had been the creative genius behind their partnership, Marcus had handled client relationships and business development, positions that gave him access to sensitive information and influential people. Through careful conversations at industry events, I learned that Marcus had been quietly establishing his own connections with investors in the months before the complaint was filed. He had even pitched solo projects to several of Phillips' existing clients, suggesting he had been planning his exit strategy well before Daniel confronted him about financial discrepancies. But the most valuable information came from an unexpected source, Jessica Rivera, a junior architect who had worked at Phillips for 2 years before leaving shortly after the complaint was filed. I invited her for coffee under the pretense of discussing a potential exhibition of emerging architects at my museum. I've been wanting to talk to someone about what happened, Jessica confessed after we'd established enough rapport for her to open up. The whole situation felt wrong, but I was afraid speaking up might hurt my own career. What did you observe? I asked, keeping my tone casual while my heart raced with potential breakthrough. About 3 months before the complaint, Marcus started spending a lot of time with the project files for Harborview Tower, often after hours when most staff had left. I thought he was just preparing for the final inspections. She hesitated, twisting her coffee cup nervously. Then, about 2 weeks before everything blew up, I accidentally opened a folder on the shared server that contained duplicates of Daniel's approval documents for Harborview, but with subtle changes to the specifications. When I mentioned it to Marcus, he said they were just draft alternatives they had considered earlier in the process. Did you believe him? I prompted when she paused. Jessica's expression answered before her words did. Not really. But challenging the founding partner didn't seem like a smart career move. I convinced myself it wasn't my business. She looked down, shame evident in her posture. After the complaint became public and I saw the specifics, I realized those altered documents were likely the basis for the allegations. I quit the next day. Would you be willing to provide a formal statement about what you saw? Her hesitation was palpable. I'm just starting my career, and the architectural community in Boston is small. If I get labeled as a whistleblower or troublemaker, what if your statement was held confidentially until other evidence corroborated it? I suggested. You wouldn't be the sole accuser, just one piece of a larger puzzle. After further discussion and my promise to protect her as much as possible, Jessica agreed to document what she had observed. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was our first tangible lead suggesting Marcus had deliberately fabricated evidence against Daniel. Over the next several months, I expanded my investigation, carefully balancing my normal work responsibilities with what was becoming an increasingly complex operation. I hired a private investigator, Sarah Kaminsky, a former Boston PD detective recommended by my father's law school colleague, to legally track Marcus's professional activities and communications. Your boyfriend picked a sophisticated opponent, Sarah told me during one of our regular updates, 6 months into our investigation. Marcus is careful, he uses separate devices for different communications, meets contacts in places without security cameras, pays for most things in cash. But I prompted, hearing the implied continuation in her tone. But everyone has patterns and vulnerabilities, she said, sliding a folder across the cafe table. His happens to be Natalie Winters. Inside the folder were photos documenting multiple meetings between Marcus and Natalie over the past year, not just recent encounters that might align with her story about being approached with evidence, but meetings dating back to well before the complaint was filed. The timestamps and locations contradicted Natalie's claim that Marcus had only recently reconnected with her regarding ethical concerns. They're more than professional contacts, Sarah continued. Based on their body language and meeting locations, I'd say they've been romantically involved for at least 10 months. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not because I cared about Daniel's ex-girlfriend's relationship status, but because it transformed our understanding of the situation. This wasn't just a business partner's betrayal for financial gain, it was a coordinated attack from two people who potentially had both professional and personal motivations. Can we access their communications? I asked, knowing we were approaching ethical and legal boundaries. Sarah shook her head firmly. Not without crossing lines I'm not willing to cross. But there are other avenues we can pursue legally. For instance, the city planning department where Natalie works maintains public records of all communications related to project approvals. If she and Marcus discussed Chan Phillips projects through official channels, those records are accessible through Freedom of Information requests. That suggestion proved invaluable. Over the next several weeks, we filed targeted FOIA requests for all communications related to Chan Phillips projects that had gone through Natalie's department. The process was slow and often frustrating, with multiple follow-ups required, but eventually, we received hundreds of pages of emails and meeting notes. Most were routine procedural communications, but buried among them were exchanges between Natalie and Marcus that showed clear coordination regarding Daniel's projects. In one particularly damning email, dated 3 weeks before the complaint was filed, Natalie wrote, "The modifications we discussed to the HT documentation are substantive enough to trigger a review if submitted anonymously. But we need to ensure no connection can be traced back to either of us. The licensing board takes confidentiality seriously, but we should use the secure channel we discussed." It wasn't a smoking gun, she could still claim she believed she was reporting genuine violations, but it demonstrated a level of coordination that contradicted her story of being an innocent party who had only recently begun to doubt Marcus's motivations. Meanwhile, Daniel was fighting his own battle to clear his name professionally. The licensing board investigation dragged on, with multiple technical experts examining the Harborview Tower plans and construction. Daniel had to withdraw from active projects, watching from the sidelines as his career stalled. Some clients stood by him, believing in his integrity, while others distanced themselves, unwilling to risk association with potential negligence. "Sometimes I wonder if it's worth continuing to fight," Daniel admitted during a particularly difficult evening, after learning that a major potential client had decided to go with another firm despite loving his design proposal. "Maybe I should just move to another state, start over with a different career." I took his hands in mine, forcing him to meet my eyes. "That's exactly what they want, for you to give up. But we're closer than you realize to exposing the truth. I need you to hold on a little longer." What I couldn't tell him yet was that Sarah had recently uncovered a critical lead, a junior IT specialist named Ryan who had worked briefly at Chan Phillips during the period when the document alterations would have occurred. Ryan had been abruptly fired by Marcus for security violations just days before the complaint was filed. Sarah located Ryan working at a tech startup in Cambridge and approached him cautiously. Initially reluctant to discuss his former employer, he eventually opened up when Sarah explained the nature of our investigation. "Marcus asked me to help him recover some corrupted files from a backup server," Ryan explained during our first meeting in a quiet corner of a Cambridge coffee shop. He was specific about the dates and project names, all Harborview Tower documents. When I recovered them, I noticed they had different specifications than the versions on the main server, but identical signatures and approval stamps. It seemed odd, but I figured maybe they were revision tracking issues. "What happened next?" I prompted. I mentioned the discrepancies to Marcus, thinking he'd want to know about potential file corruption. Instead, he got really agitated, asked exactly what I'd seen and who I'd told. Ryan's expression darkened at the memory. The next day, he accused me of accessing confidential client information without authorization and fired me on the spot. Threatened to press charges if I made a fuss about it. "Would you be willing to provide a sworn statement about what you observed?" I asked. Ryan hesitated, understandably concerned about potential repercussions. "I've been trying to rebuild my career after that firing. Getting involved in a legal dispute against a prominent architect isn't exactly going to help. What if I told you we have evidence suggesting Marcus fabricated the very documents you noticed discrepancies in? I countered. That he likely fired you not for security violations, but because you accidentally discovered his attempts to frame his business partner? After further discussion and reviewing some of the evidence we had gathered, carefully selected to protect our investigation while still demonstrating the seriousness of our claims, Ryan agreed to document his experiences. His testimony provided crucial technical context for how the altered documents might have been created and subsequently discovered as evidence of violations. By the 18-month mark of our investigation, we had accumulated substantial circumstantial evidence suggesting coordination between Marcus and Natalie to undermine Daniel professionally. What we still lacked was definitive proof of their motives and the full extent of their conspiracy. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. My museum was hosting a major exhibition on sustainable urban design, featuring works from architectural firms across New England. Despite his suspended status, Daniel had been invited to contribute conceptual designs as an individual practitioner, a small but meaningful acknowledgement from colleagues who still respected his vision. During the opening reception, I overheard a conversation between two developers discussing a massive new project planned for Boston's Westland area, a mixed-use development that would transform an entire district with environmentally progressive design. Phillips is positioning himself as the frontrunner, one said, swirling his champagne thoughtfully. Claiming his approach builds on lessons learned from the Harborview project. Convenient timing, the other replied with obvious skepticism. Chen would have been the natural choice for this kind of innovation-focused project if not for his current situation. This casual exchange illuminated the potential financial motivation behind the conspiracy. The Westland project represented exactly the kind of high-profile, career-defining opportunity that architects dream about. Marcus had eliminated his primary competition by systematically dismantling Daniel's reputation. Armed with this new perspective, I refocused our investigation on tracking Marcus's pursuit of the Westland project. Sarah discovered that he had begun preliminary discussions with the developers just weeks after Daniel's license was suspended, discussions that included Natalie in her capacity at the city planning department, creating a clear conflict of interest. Given her role in filing the complaint that had sidelined his primary competitor. 2 years into our investigation, Daniel's name was finally cleared by the licensing board. Extensive technical analysis of the Harborview Tower determined that the actual construction matched the original, code-compliant plans, not the altered documents submitted in the complaint. His license was reinstated, though the damage to his professional reputation lingered like smoke after a fire, visible, acrid, slow to dissipate. It's not enough, I told Sarah during what had become our weekly strategy session at a small restaurant far from architectural circles. The board clearing him technically still leaves room for people to wonder. Some will always think, no smoke without fire. We need absolute vindication. Sarah studied me with the penetrating gaze that had likely served her well during police interrogations. What you're really saying is that you want Marcus and Natalie to face consequences for what they did. Is that wrong? I challenged. They orchestrated a deliberate campaign to destroy Daniel's career and reputation. They nearly succeeded. Should they just continue their lives and careers without accountability? No, Sarah replied after a thoughtful pause. But pursuing that level of justice requires you to be absolutely certain of your evidence and prepared for potential backlash. They won't go down without a fight. Over the next several months, we methodically built an airtight case. Ryan provided technical expertise to demonstrate exactly how the document alterations had been created and when. Jessica's testimony established Marcus's unusual interest in the Harborview files before the complaint. The FOIA records revealed coordination between Marcus and Natalie that contradicted their official statements. But the final piece, the evidence that transformed our case from compelling to irrefutable, came from Marcus's own ambition. In his eagerness to secure the Westland project, he had begun using his lessons learned from Harborview as a selling point in presentations to investors. Sarah managed to obtain a recording of one such presentation through legal channels, in which Marcus specifically referenced identifying and correcting the very issues that led to the Chen-Phillips compliance concerns. This statement directly contradicted his official position that he had been unaware of any violations until after the complaint was filed. It suggested not only prior knowledge but potential involvement in creating the very issues he now claimed credit for identifying. Armed with this comprehensive body of evidence, I faced a crucial decision: how and when to use it for maximum effect. Simply submitting it to the licensing board might clear Daniel's name more thoroughly, but it wouldn't necessarily lead to professional consequences for Marcus and Natalie. Legal action was an option, but lawsuits were expensive, lengthy, and often ended in unsatisfying settlements. What we needed was a forum where the evidence would be seen and understood by the people who mattered most in their professional community. A venue where the truth would be undeniable and the consequences immediate. The opportunity presented itself when Daniel proposed to me on our third anniversary. As we began planning our wedding, I realized we were creating the perfect stage for the final act of our long campaign for justice. The guest list would naturally include the most influential figures in Boston's architectural community, including the Westland Project investors. "Are you sure you want to use our wedding for this?" Daniel asked when I finally shared my complete strategy with him. "This day is supposed to be about celebrating our future, not settling scores from the past." I took his hands, feeling the strength and creativity in his fingers, the same hands that had designed buildings meant to inspire and endure. "Our future and this resolution are inseparable," I explained. "As long as Marcus and Natalie's actions remain hidden, they cast a shadow over your work and our life together. Exposing the truth isn't just about justice, it's about freedom. Freedom to move forward without looking over our shoulders." After careful consideration, Daniel agreed. Together, we prepared the final elements of our plan, a contingency we hoped wouldn't be necessary but would be ready if the opportunity, or provocation, arose. What we couldn't have anticipated was that Natalie would make it so easy by accepting Marcus's +1 invitation and placing herself prominently in the front row of our wedding. Her presence wasn't just an act of breathtaking audacity, it was the catalyst that would ultimately lead to her and Marcus's professional undoing. As I stood in the bridal suite of the Elmwood Estate, watching my sister Olivia adjust my veil and contemplating Natalie's presence just rooms away, I felt not anger but a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun 3 years ago in a rain-soaked car outside the licensing board was about to close. Justice, so long deferred, was finally within reach. What had started as a desperate defense against false accusations had transformed me from a woman who appreciated beauty from a safe distance into someone who understood that sometimes protecting what matters requires getting your hands dirty. It had taught me patience, strategy, and the power of waiting for exactly the right moment to act. And that moment had arrived, wrapped in white lace and witnessed by everyone who mattered in our world. The reception hall of the Elmwood Estate hummed with an electric energy as guests processed what they had just witnessed. The elegant white roses and sage green arrangements that had seemed so perfect hours earlier now framed a much different scene than the traditional wedding celebration we had planned. In the wake of the slideshow revelation, our guests had divided into distinct camps, those openly discussing what they'd learned, those pretending nothing unusual had happened, and a small group of industry insiders who appeared to be reassessing everything they thought they knew about the past 3 years. I stood near the dessert table, champagne flute in hand, watching Daniel across the room as he spoke with Mr. Takahashi. The Westland investor's body language had transformed from polite interest to engaged respect since the slideshow, a subtle but significant shift that suggested our professional vindication was already beginning. My sister Olivia appeared at my side, her bridesmaid dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. "That," she said with a low whistle, "was not in the standard wedding planning guide. You realize you've just become a legend, right? Remember that Chin wedding where they exposed a corporate conspiracy during the slideshow?" I laughed despite the intensity of the evening. Not exactly what I pictured when we chose "memorable wedding" as our planning goal. But effective, Olivia countered, nodding toward where Natalie and Marcus had been standing before their hasty exit. I've never seen 2 people vacate a room so quickly while trying to appear dignified. It was like watching cats pretend they meant to fall off a counter. "They'll regroup," I said, my momentary amusement fading. "People like that always do. They're probably already crafting a counter-narrative." "Let them try," Olivia said, steel entering her voice. "The evidence speaks for itself. And besides," she gestured around the room, "the audience has already decided who they believe." She was right. Throughout the reception hall, I could see colleagues and friends who had stood by Daniel during his professional exile now wearing expressions of vindication. Those who had distanced themselves looked uncomfortable, perhaps reassessing their judgment. And the Westland investors, whose opinion mattered most professionally, were clearly gravitating toward Daniel with new interest. "I should probably rescue my husband from Mr. Takahashi before he starts discussing blueprint specifics at our wedding reception," I said, spotting Daniel's telltale gesture of sketching in the air, something he only did when deep in design discussions. Olivia squeezed my arm. "Go. Be the power couple you were always meant to be. I'll make sure the cake gets distributed and no one drinks too much champagne in the excitement." As I crossed the room toward Daniel, several guests stopped me with congratulations that carried deeper meaning than standard wedding wishes. Jessica Rivera, the junior architect whose testimony had been crucial to our case, gave me a subtle nod of respect as I passed. My father raised his glass in a private toast, pride evident in his expression. These small acknowledgments warmed me more than any grand gesture could have. When I reached Daniel's side, Mr. Takahashi was indeed discussing the Westland project, but he paused respectfully at my approach. "Mrs. Chen," he said with a slight bow. "I was just telling your husband that I believe we should accelerate our timeline for the Westland development. Recent events have clarified which firm embodies the values of integrity and innovation we seek." "That's wonderful news," I replied, genuinely pleased for Daniel while careful not to appear triumphant at Marcus's expense. "Though I hope you'll allow us a brief honeymoon before diving into project specifics." Mr. Takahashi smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Of course. A strong foundation in both business and marriage requires proper attention at the beginning." He bowed again to both of us. "We will speak next week. Tonight is for celebration." As he moved away to join Mrs. Okonkwo, Daniel exhaled deeply, tension visibly leaving his shoulders. 3 years, he said quietly, for my ears alone. 3 years of questioning whether I'd ever work on a significant project again. And now this. I reached up to straighten his already perfect bow tie, using the gesture as an excuse to stay close. "You never stopped being brilliant, Daniel. The world just needed a reminder of that fact." He caught my hand, pressing it against his chest where I could feel his heart beating steadily. "What you did tonight, what you've done for the past 3 years, I don't even have words for it, Eliza." "You don't need them," I assured him. "We protected what matters. That's what partners do." Daniel's eyes held mine with an intensity that made the crowded reception fade away. When I first realized what was happening with Marcus and the licensing board, I thought I'd lost everything. My career, my reputation, possibly my future. But watching you fight for the truth these past years showed me what real strength looks like. Before I could respond, the band segued into a new song, our signal for the final formal dance of the evening. Daniel extended his hand with a small bow that made me smile despite the weight of the moment. "Mrs. Chen, may I have this dance?" As we moved onto the dance floor, guests naturally parted to create space, many watching with expressions that had shifted from standard wedding sentimentality to something deeper, a recognition, perhaps, that they were witnessing the culmination of a journey more significant than they had realized. Daniel led confidently, his architectural precision translating to fluid movement as we glided across the floor. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "About what comes next." "The Westland project?" I guessed. "Your career rehabilitation? The honeymoon in Kyoto?" "Beyond all that," he said, executing a perfect turn that made my gown swirl around us. "About the person I want to be moving forward. The kind of practice I want to build." His expression grew contemplative. 3 years ago, I was focused on creating beautiful, innovative buildings. That still matters to me, but now I understand that how we build is as important as what we build. "What do you mean?" "Integrity in process. Mentoring young architects like Jessica who value ethics above expediency. Building a firm culture that makes what Marcus did unthinkable." His eyes met mine with renewed purpose. "The Westland project isn't just an opportunity to design something revolutionary, it's a platform to demonstrate a different way of practicing architecture." As he spoke, I felt a surge of pride so intense it nearly overwhelmed me. Despite everything he had endured, Daniel's focus remained on creating positive impact rather than simply rebuilding his success. While I had been fighting external battles, gathering evidence and planning our strategy, he had been engaged in a different kind of work, reimagining not just his career but his purpose. "I'd like to help," I found myself saying. "Not just as moral support, but professionally." Daniel looked surprised. "You're considering leaving the museum?" "Not leaving entirely," I clarified. "But perhaps evolving my role. The exhibition work I've done on architectural innovation has given me a perspective that could be valuable to your new vision. Maybe a partnership that bridges the gap between public education about sustainable design and actual implementation." The idea had been forming in my mind for months, but I'd hesitated to voice it, not wanting to complicate Daniel's professional recovery with my own aspirations. Now, dancing with him as his wife in the aftermath of our shared triumph, it felt right to envision a future where our professional paths might converge as our personal lives had. That would be. Daniel seemed to search for adequate words. "Incredible. Your curatorial eye, your ability to communicate complex concepts to diverse audiences, those skills would transform how we present projects like Westland to communities and stakeholders." As the dance continued, we began sketching possibilities between us, the creative energy that had first drawn us together professionally now reignited in a new context. By the time the music ended, we had outlined the beginnings of a collaborative approach that excited us both, a potential fusion of his architectural innovation and my curatorial expertise to create projects that engaged communities more meaningfully. Our guests applauded as the dance concluded, unaware that something significant had just been born on that dance floor. More than just a married couple, we had become creative collaborators with a shared vision that transcended our individual fields. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of congratulations, well wishes, and meaningful glances from those who understood the deeper significance of the evening's events. As tradition dictated, we eventually departed amid a shower of rose petals, climbing into the vintage Bentley that would take us to the Harborside Hotel where we would spend our wedding night before departing for our honeymoon the following day. Once inside the car, as it pulled away from the Elmwood Estate, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully. The tension of maintaining perfect composure through the confrontation with Natalie and Marcus, followed by the necessary social navigation of the reception, had required more energy than I'd realized. Daniel noticed immediately, reaching across to take my hand. "You were magnificent tonight," he said quietly. "But I can see what it cost you." "Worth every ounce of energy," I assured him, squeezing his fingers. "Seeing Mr. Takahashi practically offer you the Westland project on the spot was better than any wedding gift." Daniel smiled, but his expression remained thoughtful. "It's strange. After years of fighting to clear my name, to have it happen so definitively, so publicly. I almost don't know how to process it." "What do you mean?" He gazed out at the Boston skyline, illuminated against the night sky. "For 3 years, our lives have been structured around this fight, gathering evidence, planning strategy, waiting for the right moment. Now that it's done, there's a sort of vacuum. A space where all that focused energy used to be." I understood exactly what he meant. The mission that had consumed so much of our relationship had suddenly been completed, leaving us to navigate a new landscape without the familiar framework that had defined us for so long. "Maybe that's the real gift," I suggested. "Space to create something new together, without shadows from the past hanging over us." Daniel turned back to me, his expression softening. "You're right. And after watching you orchestrate this entire campaign with such precision and vision, I can't wait to see what you'll do with that freedom." When we arrived at the hotel, we found the presidential suite transformed into a romantic oasis, with rose petals scattered across the bed, champagne on ice, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. Under normal circumstances, I would have been enchanted by the elegant setting. Tonight, however, the quiet intimacy of finally being alone with my husband after the intense public performance of the day was the true luxury. Daniel loosened his tie and moved to the windows, gazing out at the harbor lights reflected on the dark water. I stepped up behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist and resting my cheek against his back. "Penny for your thoughts," I murmured. He covered my hands with his own. "I was just thinking about the first time we met. The museum exhibition on innovative urban spaces." I smiled at the memory. "You criticized my curatorial text for emphasizing aesthetic appeal over functional integration. And you demolished my argument so thoroughly that I had to rethink my entire perspective," Daniel added, turning to face me. "That was the moment I knew you were extraordinary. Not just intelligent or talented, but fearless in defending your viewpoint." I was terrified, I admitted with a laugh. Challenging a rising star architect in front of a room full of design professionals? I went home convinced I'd committed career suicide. "Instead, you earned my deepest respect," Daniel said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "And now, watching you take on Marcus and Natalie with that same precision and conviction, it feels like everything has come full circle." There was something profound in his observation. My confrontation with Daniel at that exhibition had been professional and principled, focused on ideas rather than personalities. In many ways, our approach to exposing Marcus and Natalie's conspiracy had followed the same pattern: methodical, evidence-based, and ultimately constructive rather than merely punitive. "I never wanted revenge," I said softly, articulating something I hadn't fully recognized until this moment. "Not really. I wanted restoration. I wanted the truth to have the same power in the real world that it has in principle. And now? Now I want to build something meaningful with that truth as our foundation." I moved to pour us each a glass of champagne from the waiting bottle. "To creating spaces, architectural and otherwise, where integrity isn't just rewarded but expected." Daniel accepted his glass, his expression growing more animated. "What if that became part of our mission with the Westland project? Not just sustainable design in the environmental sense, but in the ethical sense as well? Meaning? Transparent processes. Community involvement at every stage. Mentorship programs for young professionals that emphasize ethical practice alongside technical skills." His eyes brightened with the creative energy I'd first fallen in love with. What happened to me, to us, doesn't have to be just a personal victory. It could be a case study, a template for changing how projects are developed and executed. As we talked late into the night, the outline of a vision emerged between us, one that transformed our ordeal from a private battle into a potential catalyst for positive change in Boston's architectural community. Daniel's technical expertise, combined with my communications background, could create a new model for development projects, one that prioritized both innovative design and ethical practice. Morning found us still deep in conversation, having moved from champagne to coffee as we sketched ideas on hotel stationery. What had begun as a wedding night had evolved into something equally intimate but unexpectedly productive, the birth of a shared professional vision that energized us both. As sunlight spilled across the harbor, Daniel set down his pen and took my hands. "I just realized something," he said, looking slightly chagrined. "We've spent our entire wedding night planning a business strategy." I laughed, the sound carrying the release of tension I hadn't fully acknowledged. "I think that makes us either terribly unromantic or perfectly matched." "Definitely the latter," Daniel said, pulling me closer. "But perhaps we should table the business discussion until after our honeymoon. Kyoto awaits, and I believe traditional Japanese architecture deserves our undivided attention for at least a week." "Agreed," I said, settling into his embrace. "Though I reserve the right to be inspired by temple gardens and bring back ideas for the Westland public spaces." "I would expect nothing less," Daniel replied with a smile. Our flight to Japan departed that afternoon, whisking us away from Boston and the intense drama of the previous day. As the city receded beneath us, I felt a sense of closure that had been 3 years in the making. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed Daniel's career had been exposed, the truth publicly established, and our future path suddenly opened to possibilities that had seemed unattainable just months earlier. Kyoto embraced us with serene gardens, ancient temples, and the kind of timeless beauty that puts human dramas into perspective. We wandered through Arashima's bamboo groves, meditated in rock gardens where monks had found enlightenment for centuries, and stayed in a traditional ryokan where simplicity and mindfulness were elevated to art forms. Away from Boston's architectural politics and the intensity of our campaign for justice, we found space to reflect on what we had learned about ourselves, each other, and the values that would guide our future together. "I never thought I'd say this," Daniel admitted as we sat beside a koi pond in a temple garden on our third day, "but I'm almost grateful for what happened with Marcus and the licensing board." I looked at him in surprise. "Grateful? For a betrayal that nearly ended your career?" He nodded thoughtfully. "Not for the betrayal itself, but for what it revealed, about myself, about you, about what matters most." He gestured to the carefully raked gravel patterns around us. "These gardens are designed to create space for contemplation, to help visitors see beyond surface appearances to deeper truths. Our ordeal forced that kind of clarity." "What truth did you find?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "That creation matters more than recognition. That integrity, once tested, becomes unshakable. And that the right partner transforms challenges from burdens into opportunities for growth." His eyes met mine. "Without that crisis, I might have continued building a successful career without ever questioning its foundation or purpose." His words resonated deeply with my own experience. The woman who had started investigating Marcus and Natalie 3 years ago had been motivated primarily by a sense of injustice and a desire to protect someone she loved. But the process itself had transformed me, developing skills I never knew I possessed, revealing strengths that might have remained dormant in a less challenging life. "I understand," I said. "Though I still wish you could have had your epiphany without the professional trauma." Daniel smiled ruefully. "As would I. But perhaps that's the nature of true growth, it rarely comes through comfortable paths." Throughout our 2 weeks in Japan, we alternated between complete immersion in the present moment, savoring exquisite meals, exploring hidden temples, experiencing traditional tea ceremonies, and reflective conversations about the future we wanted to build together. Without the pressure of gathering evidence or planning strategy, our creative energies flowed freely, generating ideas that excited us both professionally and personally. By the time we boarded our return flight to Boston, we had crystallized a vision that transformed our individual skills into something greater than the sum of its parts. Daniel would rebuild his architectural practice with a focus on sustainable community development, while I would create a new role that bridged my museum work with public engagement in design processes. Together, we would approach projects like Westland not just as buildings to be constructed, but as opportunities to demonstrate a more ethical, transparent approach to urban development. As our plane descended toward Boston Logan Airport, the city skyline came into view, a familiar landscape that now held new promise. Somewhere in that collection of buildings was the future headquarters of Chen Integrated Design, the firm we had conceptualized during our honeymoon. Somewhere were the Westland investors, waiting to formalize their decision to award Daniel the project that would re-establish his professional standing. And somewhere, perhaps, were Marcus and Natalie, dealing with the consequences of their exposed conspiracy. "Ready?" Daniel asked as the plane touched down, knowing the question encompassed far more than our physical return. I squeezed his hand. "Absolutely." The following days unfolded with remarkable momentum. Mr. Takahashi and Mrs. Okonkwo officially awarded the Westland project to Daniel, providing not just the commission itself but a public vote of confidence that reverberated through Boston's architectural community. Former clients who had distanced themselves during the ethics investigation began reaching out, eager to reconnect with the architect whose name had been so definitively cleared. Equally significant were the professional consequences for Marcus and Natalie. The Architectural Licensing Board, presented with the evidence we had compiled, opened a formal investigation into Marcus's role in fabricating documents and making false allegations. The city planning department placed Natalie on administrative leave pending review of her conflict of interest in multiple development projects where she had failed to disclose her relationship with Marcus. But most meaningful to me was watching Daniel step into his renewed career with a transformed sense of purpose. Where once he had pursued projects primarily for their creative and professional opportunities, he now evaluated potential work through the lens of community impact and ethical practice. He became selective about clients, choosing to work with those who shared his vision for sustainable, inclusive development rather than simply chasing prestigious commissions. 1 month after our return, as we prepared for the official Westland project launch, Daniel received an unexpected email from Jessica Rivera, the junior architect whose testimony had been crucial to our case. "She's accepting our offer," he announced, looking up from his laptop with evident pleasure. "She'll be the first associate in the new firm." "That's wonderful news," I replied, genuinely delighted. Jessica's integrity during the investigation had impressed us both, and her talent as a young architect made her exactly the kind of professional we wanted to mentor. "She mentioned something interesting in her acceptance," Daniel added. "Apparently 3 other junior architects from Marcus's firm have reached out to her about potential positions with us. Word is spreading that we're building something different." This ripple effect, the idea that our stand for truth might influence not just our own careers but the broader professional culture, was perhaps the most satisfying outcome of our long campaign. What had begun as a defense against injustice was evolving into a positive model that attracted others who shared our values. 6 months after our wedding, we stood together at the Westland groundbreaking ceremony. The project had evolved significantly under Daniel's leadership, incorporating community input and innovative sustainability features that had earned widespread praise. As Daniel addressed the assembled stakeholders, city officials, and media representatives, I watched with pride as he articulated a vision that seamlessly integrated architectural excellence with ethical practice. "The buildings we create become part of our shared legacy," he said, his voice carrying across the attentive crowd. "They reflect not just our design aesthetics but our values. At Westland, we're committed to a process as thoughtfully constructed as the structures themselves, transparent, inclusive, and built on uncompromising integrity." As applause followed his remarks, I caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the gathering. Natalie Winters stood partially obscured by a decorative planting, watching the ceremony with an unreadable expression. Our eyes met briefly across the distance, and I felt no triumph, no lingering resentment, only a calm acknowledgement that justice had found its course. Later that evening, as Daniel and I celebrated the successful launch with the core team that would bring Westland to life, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought us to this moment. From that rainy afternoon outside the licensing board to this milestone achievement, we had traveled a path neither of us could have anticipated. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, finding me alone on the rooftop terrace of our downtown loft, gazing out at the city lights. "Everything that had to go wrong for everything to go right," I replied honestly. "If Marcus hadn't betrayed you, if Natalie hadn't filed those false complaints, if your license hadn't been suspended, we wouldn't be here now, creating something that might actually change how architecture is practiced in this city." Daniel leaned against the railing beside me, our shoulders touching. "There's a concept in Japanese aesthetics called kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The philosophy behind it is that breakage and repair become part of an object's history, making it more beautiful rather than something to disguise." "You think that's what happened to us?" I asked. "Our broken places were filled with gold?" "I think the fractures in our life created space for something stronger to flow in," he said thoughtfully. "Your extraordinary determination. My reevaluation of what matters in my work. Our partnership, forged under pressure into something unbreakable." As we stood together overlooking the city where we had fought for truth and won, I understood that the most significant victory wasn't the professional vindication or even the Westland project. It was the transformation of ourselves, from individuals pursuing separate paths to partners with a shared mission that transcended our individual ambitions. The woman who had discovered her fiancé's ex sitting in the front row of her wedding had already been a warrior, though she hadn't fully realized it then. The battle for Daniel's reputation had revealed not just my capacity for strategic thinking and patient determination, but my deepest values, a commitment to truth that wouldn't bend under pressure or compromise for convenience. You know, I said, turning to face my husband, when you whispered to me about Natalie during our ceremony, you thought you were telling me something that might shake me. But what you really did was confirm what I already knew, that we were exactly where we needed to be, facing exactly what we needed to face. Daniel smiled, drawing me closer. And now? Now we build, not just buildings, but a practice, a partnership, a legacy founded on everything we've learned through fire. I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady strength that had never wavered even in our darkest moments. Something that will stand long after us, its foundations too deep to be shaken. As the Boston night enfolded us, stars visible despite the city lights, I felt a profound certainty that what we had endured had indeed been transformed into gold, not just mending what was broken, but creating something stronger and more beautiful than what had existed before. Our struggle for justice had become a catalyst for evolution, both personal and professional, opening pathways we might never have discovered in easier circumstances. To foundations, Daniel said softly, as if reading my thoughts. To foundations, I echoed. And to building on truth, no matter how hard one. 1 year after our wedding day revelation, Daniel and I stood together on the observation deck of the nearly completed first phase of the Westland development. Boston stretched before us, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city's distinctive blend of historic architecture and modern innovation. Below us, construction teams worked with practiced efficiency, bringing to life the vision that had emerged from both professional expertise and personal redemption. Remember when you couldn't even get a meeting with the Westland investors? I asked, leaning against the railing beside my husband. Now they're asking about accelerating the timeline for Phase 2. Daniel smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way that still hadn't been automatic when we first met 6 years ago. I remember wondering if I'd ever design anything more significant than residential renovations again. If my career was effectively over at 35. The memory of that uncertain time, the rain-soaked afternoon outside the licensing board, the months of gathering evidence, the careful strategy that culminated at our wedding, felt simultaneously distant and immediate. Like a scar that had healed but still told an important story. Do you ever regret how public it all became? I asked, something I'd wondered occasionally over the past year. The exposure at our wedding, the media coverage afterward? Daniel considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I used to think the best professional path was to keep your head down, do excellent work, and let that speak for itself, he said finally. The idea of publicly confronting deception felt uncomfortable, almost unprofessional. But now? He gestured toward the bustling construction site below us. I've come to believe that sometimes truth needs witnesses. Patterns only change when they're exposed to light. His perspective resonated deeply with my own evolution. The woman who had begun investigating Marcus and Natalie's conspiracy had been motivated primarily by personal loyalty and a sense of injustice. But the process had transformed me, revealing a passionate belief that integrity in professional spaces shouldn't be exceptional, it should be expected. Speaking of witnesses, I said, checking my watch, we should head back to the office. The mentorship program orientation starts in an hour. Daniel nodded, his expression brightening with the enthusiasm he always showed for the initiative we had launched 6 months earlier. The Chen Integrated Design Mentorship Program paired promising young professionals with established architects committed to ethical practice, creating a pipeline of talent grounded in both technical excellence and principled leadership. Jessica said we have 28 participants this round, he remarked as we descended in the construction elevator. Double what we anticipated. Word is spreading, I agreed. Especially after your presentation at the AIA conference last month. That presentation, Integrity as Infrastructure, Building Ethical Foundations in Architectural Practice, had transformed our personal experience into a professional framework that resonated throughout the industry. Using the Marcus Phillips case as a central example, carefully anonymized, though most insiders knew the details, Daniel had outlined how weak ethical infrastructure could compromise even technically sound design processes. The elevator reached ground level, and we stepped out into the controlled chaos of an active construction site. Project managers nodded respectfully as we passed, pride evident in their expressions. The Westland development had become known not just for its innovative design but for its transparent processes and collaborative approach, elements directly influenced by our experiences with Marcus's deception. Our driver waited at the site entrance to take us back to the Chen Integrated Design headquarters in downtown Boston. The firm, now 18 months old, had grown faster than either of us had anticipated, attracting both clients and talent drawn to our explicit commitment to ethical practice alongside design excellence. Ms. Okonkwo called while you were inspecting the South Quadrant, our assistant informed Daniel as we settled into the car. The investment committee has unanimously approved the expansion into the eastern parcel. They'd like to schedule a preliminary design meeting next week. Daniel's eyes met mine, quiet satisfaction evident in his expression. The eastern parcel expansion represented a significant vote of confidence from the Westland investors, an acknowledgement that our approach was delivering not just aesthetic and functional value, but the kind of reputational integrity that increasingly mattered to stakeholders. Schedule it for Wednesday morning, Daniel replied. And make sure Jessica and the Community Advisory Board representatives can attend. I want their input from the beginning. As our car navigated Boston's afternoon traffic, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey of the past 18 months. What had begun as a desperate defense against false accusations had evolved into something far more significant, a reimagining of how architectural practice could operate when grounded in transparent processes and ethical decision-making. You're contemplating something important, Daniel observed, recognizing the expression I wore when processing deeper thoughts. Care to share? I was just thinking about how differently this all could have turned out, I admitted. If we hadn't documented everything so carefully. If we hadn't waited for the right moment to present the evidence. If Natalie hadn't made the critical mistake of attending our wedding. Daniel nodded, understanding the unspoken alternative timeline, one where his reputation remained permanently tarnished, his career limited by whispered doubts that never fully disappeared. The patience was the hardest part, he acknowledged. Waiting 3 years while gathering evidence, knowing the truth but unable to prove it convincingly. Most people would have given up or settled for partial vindication. I'm not most people, I replied with a smile that acknowledged the steel beneath my curator's exterior, the determination that had transformed me from Daniel's supportive partner into the architect of Marcus and Natalie's professional downfall. For which I remain eternally grateful, Daniel said, taking my hand. Your refusal to accept injustice didn't just save my career, it created something entirely new. When we arrived at the Chen Integrated Design offices, housed in a renovated warehouse in Boston's Innovation District, the space hummed with the creative energy that had become our firm's hallmark. Architects and designers collaborated around central workstations, while community engagement specialists prepared materials for upcoming neighborhood consultations. The transparent glass-walled conference rooms, a deliberate design choice reflecting our commitment to openness, were filled with teams engaged in animated discussions about current projects. Jessica Rivera, now our lead associate architect, intercepted us as we entered. Her transformation over the past year had been nearly as significant as our own, from a hesitant whistleblower fearful for her career to a confident professional, mentoring others in both technical excellence and ethical practice. The mentorship candidates are already arriving, she informed us, tablet in hand. And there's something else you should know, Architectural Review called. They want to feature the Westland project in their sustainability issue, with a particular focus on our community engagement process. That's excellent news, Daniel replied. Their readership is exactly the audience we want to reach with these methods. Jessica hesitated slightly before continuing. There's one more thing. Marcus Phillips has apparently launched a new firm focused on ethical urban development. Their website language bears a striking resemblance to our mission statement. I felt a momentary flash of indignation before it transformed into something closer to vindication. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery? I suggested, raising an eyebrow. Or a desperate attempt at professional rehabilitation, Jessica added, not bothering to hide her skepticism. After what she had witnessed at Chen Phillips, her distrust of Marcus ran deep. Daniel's response surprised us both. Actually, I think it's progress, he said thoughtfully. If Marcus is rebranding himself around ethical practice, even if it's just marketing, it means the conversation in the industry is shifting. It means clients and investors are starting to demand the transparency and integrity we've been advocating. His perspective highlighted something fundamental about Daniel that continued to impress me, his ability to see beyond personal vindication to the broader impact of our work. Where I might have focused on Marcus's hypocrisy, Daniel recognized the systemic change that forced even someone like Marcus to adapt. You're right, I acknowledged. The goal was never just personal justice. It was changing what clients expect. What young architects aspire to, what the industry rewards. As we moved toward the large studio space where the mentorship orientation would take place, Daniel added quietly, besides, claiming ethical principles and actually practicing them are very different things. The methods we've developed at Westland, community advisory boards, transparent decision documentation, inclusive design charrettes, aren't easy to implement without genuine commitment. The mentorship candidates were gathered in our central studio, a diverse group of early career architects, urban planners, and design specialists who had applied to learn our integrated approach. Some came from large corporate firms seeking a different perspective, others were recent graduates determined to begin their careers with strong ethical foundations. As Daniel stepped to the front to welcome them, I observed how naturally he had grown into his role as not just a designer but a thought leader. The man who had once focused primarily on creating beautiful, innovative buildings had evolved into someone equally concerned with the integrity of the processes that produced them. "Welcome to Chen Integrated Design," he began, his voice carrying easily through the studio. "You're here because you believe, as we do, that how we build is as important as what we build. That the invisible structures of decision-making, community engagement, and ethical practice form the foundation of truly sustainable design." As he continued outlining the mentorship program's approach, I noticed several candidates taking particularly engaged notes. Their expressions reminded me of my own determination 3 years earlier, the recognition that sometimes fighting for better systems requires learning skills beyond your original professional training. The orientation session evolved into a lively discussion, with candidates sharing experiences from their own workplaces that highlighted the need for stronger ethical frameworks. One young woman described being asked to minimize potential environmental impacts in a presentation to community stakeholders. Another mentioned pressure to use materials from a supplier with documented labor violations because of existing relationships with firm leadership. These aren't just individual ethical dilemmas, Daniel noted as the discussion deepened. They're symptoms of systems that prioritize efficiency and established relationships over integrity. Our goal isn't just to help you navigate these challenges, it's to create processes that make such compromises unnecessary and unacceptable. As the session concluded and the candidates broke into smaller groups with our team leaders, I found myself approached by Ryan, the former IT specialist whose testimony about document alterations had been crucial to our case against Marcus. "I almost didn't recognize you," I said warmly, genuinely pleased to see him. "The startup world clearly agrees with you." Ryan had left the architectural industry after his experience at Chin Phillips, finding a position with a technology company focused on document security and integrity verification, a career pivot directly influenced by what he had witnessed. "The principles transferred more easily than I expected," he replied with a smile. "Protecting information integrity, creating transparent documentation processes, it's not so different from what you're doing here, just in a different medium. What brings you to our mentorship orientation?" I asked, curious about his presence at an architecture-focused event. "Actually, I'm here because my company is interested in potential collaboration," Ryan explained. "We've developed verification systems that could integrate with your transparent design process documentation, creating unalterable records of decision pathways, approval chains, community input integration, essentially making it impossible for someone to do what Marcus did with the Harborview Tower documents." The synchronicity was remarkable, a technology solution emerging directly from the very problem that had nearly destroyed Daniel's career. As Ryan outlined the potential integration, I found myself mentally connecting it to our existing processes, seeing how such a system could further strengthen the ethical infrastructure we were building. "We should discuss this with Daniel and our technical team," I said, already envisioning applications beyond our own firm. "This could be valuable not just for us but for the industry standards we're trying to influence." As the evening progressed and the formal orientation transitioned to a networking reception, I found myself in conversation with several of the mentorship candidates, sharing insights from my unique perspective as someone who had entered the architectural world from museum curation. My role bridging public engagement with technical design had become an unexpected strength of our integrated approach. "I never expected to be working directly in architecture," I explained to a young urban planner who had asked about my unusual career path. "But I've found that outsider perspectives often reveal blind spots in established systems. Sometimes the most valuable contribution comes from asking questions others assume are already answered. Like questioning whether standard professional practices actually serve the public interest," she suggested, clearly connecting my experience to her own doubts about conventional planning approaches. "Exactly," I confirmed. "Traditional training teaches you how to work within existing systems. But transforming those systems often requires capabilities you develop through other experiences, in my case, investigating a conspiracy to undermine my husband's career. She laughed, then realized I was serious. Wait, that actually happened? I thought that was just industry gossip. Very real, I assured her. And it taught me skills no formal education could provide: strategic patience, evidence documentation, timing critical revelations for maximum impact. All capabilities that translate surprisingly well to changing entrenched professional cultures. As the evening wound down, Daniel and I found a quiet moment in his office overlooking Boston Harbor. The city lights reflected on the water, creating shimmering pathways that mirrored the new directions we had charted over the past year. Ryan's technology integration has fascinating potential, I said, sharing the highlights of our conversation. Imagine if every architectural firm had systems that made document manipulation immediately detectable. If the standard became unalterable decision trails that clients, communities, and regulatory bodies could verify. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. The kind of system that would have stopped Marcus immediately. He gazed out at the harbor, where the first phase of Westland was visible in the distance. It's strange to think that without what he did, none of this would exist, not our firm, not the mentorship program, not these emerging industry standards. From poison to medicine, I mused, referencing a concept we had encountered during our honeymoon in Japan. The idea that something harmful can be transformed into something healing through proper understanding and application. Precisely, Daniel agreed. Though I wouldn't recommend our specific path to others. 3 years of investigation followed by a wedding day confrontation? I laughed. Perhaps not the most efficient professional development strategy. As we prepared to leave for the evening, Jessica knocked lightly on the open door, tablet still in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought you should see this before tomorrow. The Architectural Ethics Committee has formally censured Marcus Phillips based on the evidence submitted during their investigation. He's been placed on a 3-year probationary period with mandatory oversight of all project documentation. The news represented the final piece of institutional accountability we had been waiting for, formal acknowledgement from the professional body that governed architectural practice that Marcus's actions had violated core ethical standards. How do you feel? Jessica asked, clearly remembering the long journey from her first hesitant disclosures about document discrepancies to this moment of professional vindication. Daniel considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Relieved that the system eventually worked, even if it required extraordinary effort to make it function. But more focused on preventing similar situations than celebrating this particular outcome. His response exemplified the transformation I had witnessed in him, from an architect primarily concerned with creating beautiful structures to a professional equally invested in strengthening the ethical foundations of his entire field. Later that night, as we returned to our loft overlooking the harbor, a package waited outside our door, a shipping tube with a Kyoto postmark. Inside was a hand-painted scroll featuring a Japanese proverb in elegant calligraphy, accompanied by a note from the Ryokan owner who had hosted us during our honeymoon. This arrived today, I said, carefully unrolling the delicate rice paper. From Mr. Tanaka in Kyoto. Daniel examined the calligraphy with appreciation. What does it say? After the rain, earth hardens, I translated, reading from Mr. Tanaka's accompanying note. He says it reminded him of our story, that difficulties, properly weathered, create stronger foundations. The proverb captured something essential about our journey. The storm of false accusations, professional exile, and painstaking investigation had indeed created hardened earth beneath us, ground solid enough to support not just our individual careers but a vision for transforming architectural practice more broadly. He's right, Daniel said softly. Though I sometimes wonder about the rain that never fell on others, the architects who never had their ethical foundations tested the way mine were. Perhaps that's the purpose of the mentorship program. I suggested. To help others develop that strength without requiring them to endure the same storm. The following morning brought news that added another dimension to our evolving story. Mrs. Okonkwo called Daniel personally rather than through our office channels, an unusual step that suggested sensitive information. The Westland Investment Committee has received an acquisition proposal for the eastern parcel, she explained once we had her on speakerphone in our home office. From a new firm called Integrity Urban Development. Daniel and I exchanged glances, immediately recognizing Marcus's attempt to position his rebranded company for a portion of the Westland project. Their proposal includes several design elements remarkably similar to concepts from your initial presentation, Mrs. Okonkwo continued, her tone making clear her awareness of the situation's delicacy. The committee has unanimously rejected the proposal, but I felt you should know about this approach. I appreciate the transparency, Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the clear provocation this represented. May I ask what rationale the committee provided for the rejection? Two primary factors, Mrs. Okonkwo explained. First, the obvious ethical concerns given Mr. Phillips's history. But equally important was our recognition that Chin Integrated Design's approach isn't merely about aesthetic concepts that can be copied. It's about a process and philosophy that are integral to the development's success and long-term sustainability. Her words represented perhaps the most meaningful validation yet of what we had built, recognition that our competitive advantage lay not just in Daniel's design brilliance but in the ethical infrastructure we had created around it. After concluding the call, Daniel sat quietly for a moment, processing this latest development. He's still trying to capitalize on what he stole from me, he observed finally. Still believing he can separate design concepts from the integrity that produces them. The difference is that now others can see the distinction, I pointed out. 3 years ago, investors might have considered his proposals solely on technical merit. Today, they recognize that process integrity is inseparable from design quality. Daniel nodded slowly. That's the real victory, isn't it? Not just personal vindication, but shifting the standards by which our entire profession is judged. As we prepared for the day ahead, the preliminary design meeting for the Eastern Parcel expansion, followed by a community engagement session. For existing Westland residents, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought us to this point. The woman who had discovered her fiancé's ex-girlfriend sitting prominently in the front row of her wedding had already been fighting a 3-year battle for truth and professional justice. The whispered revelation about Natalie's connection to Marcus hadn't been a shock but rather the final catalyst for implementing a carefully constructed plan for exposure and accountability. But what neither Daniel nor I could have anticipated was how that moment of confrontation would transform not just our personal and professional lives, but potentially the culture of an entire industry. What had begun as a defense against injustice had evolved into a proactive vision for architectural practice grounded in transparency, community engagement, and uncompromising ethical standards. As we walked to our offices that morning, deliberately choosing the 20-minute journey that took us past the Westland development, Daniel stopped suddenly, gazing up at the emerging structures that represented not just his design vision, but our shared values. What do you see? I asked, curious about his intense focus. Not just buildings, he replied, his voice quiet but firm. Proof that standing for truth, even when it seems impossible to establish, creates foundations strong enough to support everything that comes after. The buildings rose against Boston's skyline, concrete and steel manifestations of concepts once confined to drafting tables and digital renderings. But the true architecture, the invisible structure that gave meaning to the physical forms, lay in the integrity of decisions, the transparency of processes, and the courage to defend truth even when the cost seemed prohibitively high. You know what I'm most proud of? I said as we resumed our walk, the morning sun warming the brick facades around us. What's that? That we didn't just survive what happened, we alchemized it into something valuable. We didn't just expose deception, we created an alternative that makes such deception harder to perpetrate and easier to detect. Daniel's hand found mine as we walked, the simple gesture carrying echoes of countless moments when we had drawn strength from each other through the darkest periods of our ordeal. From the beginning, that's been your gift, he said. Seeing beyond the immediate injury to the systemic remedy. Looking not just for justice but for transformation. As we approached the Chen Integrated Design offices, where our team was gathering to continue building on the foundation we had established, I recognized the truth in Daniel's observation. The journey that had begun with a desperate defense against false accusations had evolved into something far more significant, a vision for practicing architecture that honored not just the structures we created but the integrity with which we created them. What Natalie and Marcus had never understood, what they could never have anticipated as they plotted to undermine Daniel's career, was that their actions would ultimately strengthen rather than destroy, hardening the earth beneath our feet, creating ground solid enough to support not just our individual recovery but a movement toward greater accountability throughout the profession. When Daniel had whispered in my ear during our wedding ceremony, identifying Natalie's true connection to Marcus, he couldn't have known that he was marking not just a moment of personal vindication but the beginning of a professional revolution. What had seemed like an end, the exposure of a 3-year conspiracy, had actually been a beginning, the first stone in a foundation that would support structures far more significant than any single building. As we entered our offices, greeted by a team united not just by professional goals but by shared values, I felt the profound satisfaction of having transformed a personal injury into a public good. The woman who had once investigated a conspiracy against her fiancé had become part of creating a new standard for architectural practice, one where integrity wasn't just an individual virtue but a structural element as essential as steel and concrete. And perhaps that was the most powerful alchemy of all, the transformation of private pain into public principle, of individual struggle into communal strength. The hardened earth beneath our feet now supported not just our journey forward but a path others could follow, guided by the belief that truth, however long delayed, creates the only foundation truly worth building upon. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.